Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Just about any parent would be hurt if their own child or children refuse to talk with them. But some estranged parents feel their children's rejection even more deeply than others. I think when your self-esteem is already injured and lower than it should be, your life and relationships are more difficult overall than they could be. Being rejected pours fuel on an already damaging fire. Even if all your relationships with other people were totally harmonious, when self-esteem is low, your relationship with yourself is not as close or as nurturing as it should be. Self-esteem is a term that's widely used but poorly understood. So before I go any further, let me define what I mean when I talk about self-esteem. I define self-esteem as the absence of baseless shame. The absence of baseless shame. It's as simple as that. It doesn't mean you think you're great. It certainly doesn't mean you think you're better than anyone else. It just means that you don't have to go through life with a secret nagging suspicion that there's something wrong with you. That's baseless shame. There's something wrong with me. Many people do feel that way. They carry much more shame than they need to in order to function in society. I know this because I'm a therapist and I've been privy to lots of people's private thoughts. Most people who are statistically normal have enough shame not to do outrageous things in public. That's what I call functional shame, because it makes us better members of society. It encourages us to cooperate with others and to behave well. But the baseless shame of low self-esteem goes way beyond just watching your P's and Q's. It's a baseless shame. There's no reason for it. It's not about what we're doing, but about who we are. Low self-esteem convinces you that there's something wrong with you, and it's nothing you can put your finger on. It's just that you're mysteriously somehow not a good or worthy person just because you're you. In my opinion, that belief is not only unnecessary, but damaging. And it's the result of injury to the normal, healthy self-esteem that you were born with. You didn't come out of the womb feeling ashamed of yourself. You had no idea that anything might be wrong with you when you were still a baby. It's life experiences that give us that mistaken idea. And even a pretty normal garden variety childhood will instill a certain amount of shame in most of us. It's just part of being disciplined and learning that we're only conditionally acceptable depending on whether or not others are pleased with us. Now, I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this notion, even though I could talk about this subject all day. So let's suffice it to say that low self-esteem is the result of injury to your naturally healthy self-concept. And low self-esteem absolutely affects all of your relationships, including the one you share with your child. The lower your self-esteem is, that is, the more you believe there's something inherently wrong with you, the more you will need to defend yourself against anything that threatens to expose the vulnerable, imperfect person you know yourself to be. The interesting thing about this is that people who enjoy healthy self-esteem, they also know that they are vulnerable and imperfect. But instead of hating themselves for it, they love themselves because of those very traits. They know that it's their imperfection and their vulnerability that make them able to relate to other human beings, because the vast majority of us feel exactly the same way. If you have low self-esteem, you don't realize that it's your human frailty that makes you lovable. And so when someone is disappointed by your behavior or misinterprets your intentions, it feels incredibly threatening and just awful. And what do we do when we feel threatened? We protect ourselves. It's instinctive. We're practically programmed to defend ourselves somehow against attacks, whether they're physical or emotional. If your self-esteem has been sufficiently injured, your child's decision to cut you off will feel like a personal attack that you must defend yourself against. And unfortunately, that defensiveness, while it's instinctive and natural and therefore totally understandable, hampers your ability to respond effectively to the needs that your child is expressing through his behavior. That's why it is crucial to get a handle on your own self-esteem when you're estranged from an adult child. Now, you may be thinking, my self-esteem was perfectly fine until my child decided to cut me off. This is what's injured my self-esteem. But if your child's estrangement has pierced you through the heart, I guarantee you that your self-esteem was already injured before this happened, maybe even before your child was in the picture. You just may not have realized it until your child's behavior forced you to notice your pain. The kicker is that in addition to making estrangement more painful, low self-esteem also makes it harder to reconcile. There are at least 3 problems that are created by low self-esteem in the parent that make reconciliation harder. The first one is defensiveness. Because your emotional brain is busy defending you against the implied criticism of the estrangement, you can't really listen to your child's point of view. So you can't take in the really important information you need in order to make repairs. The second problem created by low self-esteem and estrangement is that it discourages you from looking at yourself. There's already a secret fear that something is terribly wrong with you. Why on earth would you want to examine a self that's so obviously defective? It feels like the only possible outcome is you'll even feel worse about yourself. But that leads to the third problem, which is not being able to acknowledge and accept your own feelings. If you can't look inside, then you're doomed to remain a stranger to yourself, and that's a terribly lonely way to live. But even if you're never lonely, there's a relational problem with major implications here. If you're not able to acknowledge and accept what you feel, then you won't be able to acknowledge and accept what anyone else feels either. I want to say that again. If you're not able to acknowledge and accept what you feel, then you won't be able to acknowledge and accept what others feel. This is a huge problem if you're trying to reconcile. It takes practice to identify and embrace our own emotions because most cultures in the developed world don't teach this at all. So emotional illiteracy is the norm. A lot of times, adult children will get into therapy, and then shortly after that, they estrange themselves from their parents. And the parents, of course, think that the therapist somehow told their kid to do that. But more often, what I believe happens is the therapist acknowledges and accepts the child's feelings. And once you've had your feelings acknowledged and accepted by someone, it becomes less tolerable when other people aren't acknowledging or accepting your feelings, especially people you think should want to do that, like your own parents. But most parents, I would say, certainly in the U.S., where I live, have little to no training in this skill. They aren't used to acknowledging and accepting their own feelings, so it doesn't even occur to them that they might want to do that with their kids, especially when the kids are small and there's so many other things to think about doing with them. You can learn how to acknowledge and accept feelings in both yourself and other people. It's a learnable skill for anyone of average intelligence. And as a therapist, I can tell you this is much appreciated by people you talk to. The easiest place to start acknowledging and accepting emotions is with yourself and your own feelings, because at least you have some sense or can gain a sense of what's actually going on inside you. But remember, low self-esteem discourages the practice of looking inside at yourself and your feelings. That's why this is a problem. Again, those 3 problems that I mentioned earlier were defensiveness, which makes it hard to listen, unwillingness to look inside, and the resulting lack of acknowledgement and acceptance of emotions that makes relationships so much harder than they need to be sometimes. I'm sure there are many other difficulties created or exacerbated by low self-esteem, but I'll just leave it at that. I just urge you to consider that there is nothing inherently wrong with you, and that doing the work of addressing low self-esteem will go further toward helping you permanently reconcile with your child than anything else you can do. To improve self-esteem, you need to have a relationship with someone who sees and accepts you exactly as you are. And that can be hard to find in the wild, so to speak, which is why there are therapists. A good therapist will provide the visibility and safety for you to expand your knowledge of yourself. Please believe me when I say this, that the most important person whose needs you must serve is you. Whatever is good and right and healthy for you will support and nurture your relationship with your child. You are not just someone's parent. You're not an empty shell. There's a complex, fascinating, and worthwhile person inside you who needs and deserves your attention. Trust yourself enough to turn your loving attention inward. And if you'd like to find a local therapist to help you with this task, of course I think that's a great idea. So I'll put some links to therapist directories in the show notes. You can find those show notes at reconnectionclub.com/39. Until next time, please remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.